Bentley here, good evening to you. On behalf of the Calgary Climate Hub, I welcome you to A Climate of Change, our weekly live cast exploring with thought leaders from across Canada what this wildly unprecedented moment in history means for our province, this country, the economic system, and specifically the climate crisis. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Eyaksi Nakota Nations, the Métis Nations of Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. I'd like to also make a second land acknowledgement on behalf of another group of folks that have a stake in this land that we stand on today, and that is our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, and all future generations. I urge you to keep them in mind during this time as we face unprecedented change and start making decisions about what comes next. For those of you watching tonight via Facebook Live or on the Zoomcast, please feel free to post your questions for our guests, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Should you wish me not to say your name, please type the word anonymous before your question, as this show will be shared to our social networks. Otherwise, we'll assume your consent in the use of your name in the broadcast. Tonight's guests are both the current and former executive directors of Canada's foremost think tank on energy and environmental issues, the Pembina Institute's Linda Coady and Ed Whittingham. For over 35 years now, the Pembina Institute has been a bright light to those in our province looking towards a healthy, prosperous, and climate-friendly future. Pembina Institute, welcome to A Climate of Change.
Great. Thanks for having us, Steve.
Yeah, you bet.
Good
So, you know, when the same thing happened to everybody all over the world, we started to hear more and more about this coronavirus. Then all of a sudden, all of us got really serious about it, and then we were in lockdown. And I feel like just about everybody, no matter what your background, got a teachable moment out of it, or got a few of them. And so for myself, I felt like I'm in lockdown here, and I'm looking everywhere, and I was thinking of my big teachable moment that I feel like it's hard to walk away from is that it's going to be harder for people to tell me that we can't afford to take climate action, given that it turns out there are all sorts of things that we can afford once we believe the crisis is significant enough. What were some of the teachable moments that really stuck out to the two of you during that time?
Can I lead?
Sure, go ahead, Linda.
Okay. So you asked for three, Steve. So I thought one teachable moment that I would identify is, this is a bit of a, as the saying goes, a postcard from the future, right? We are going to be experiencing more shocks of this type locally and globally, whether it's public health or whether it's climate impacts. This is going to happen again, would be one teachable moment in some way, shape, or form. And then another one for me was how things converge. So you had the pandemic, you had the economic crisis, you had the disproportionate impact of the economic crisis on some sectors and women and, sections of the economy or parts of the economy. And then you had the whole issue around racial injustice and social and economic inequality explode recently with the events of the United States. So that convergence factor, is something to take away from all of this. And then the last thing that I take away from it is that things can really change. When people want to make change, a lot of change can happen in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are all great points, Linda, and it's hard not to echo them. For me, perhaps the most immediate thing I thought coming out of this crisis, and to your point around, making change happen quickly, climate is a long-term issue, and it's often for many of us, and those of us who aren't living on the front lines of seeing the crisis, say in melting permafrost, or seeing the change of migratory patterns of animals, it can be that thing that's still abstract and off in the future. And as a result, we tend to treat it as something that is far away. But when you've got an immediate crisis affecting human health, that people will move blindingly fast. And I think for all of us who care about the links between climate and human health, we need to better broadcast those links to encourage that quick action, because Linda, as you pointed out, people just move very, very quickly. for me, it's also, it's been a reflection on the state of energy in Canada and particularly in Alberta. You know, we've all, Peter Terzakian, who's a friend and thinker, you know, he says there are 3 stages of transition. We're in disruption, denial, and transition. Well, people say, gosh, you know, we've hit COVID crisis, demand destruction, we had a price war, you know, that's really forced companies into transition. Well, frankly, we've been going through transition for a few years now. And we had this bifurcation in the industry, but I think now we've moved a lot of people out of the denial camp and into the realization that this is happening, that these are great market forces. It's not just a matter of getting the federal monkey off our backs, that the world has fundamentally changed. And while we don't know the answers are, I really see, particularly in this province, a lot fewer people in the denial camp that a great energy transition is happening. And the third realization, and this is a very personal one, Steve, is just, you know, the almost the unsustainability of my own lifestyle and the work that I did. Take me and ground me at home with my friends and family for 3 months, let me breathe. And it's amazing that creativity happens. It's amazing when you're not shuttling to planes or on planes or in and out of hotels or meeting with people, all the things that you can get done. And at a very personal level, the behavioral change where we're interacting virtually. I don't have to jump in a car. You don't have to jump in a car. And we're still having this rich conversation and in a lower emission way as well. So I really hope that that's going to stick. And that's one of the silver linings coming out of this.
Yeah, I think there's going to be more work at home stuff. I saw, I think it was Shopify. That's a Canadian company that has said that office centric work is not something they're interested in even doing anymore. And I think we're going to all realize there's a lot of benefits to this. I think there's a lot of really positive stuff that came from that. So the other thing that sticks out to me is over the first few weeks of this, well, no, throughout this, there were people that wanted to blame China, and they talk about wet markets in Wuhan and all that. And, you know, my somewhat snarky response is just about everything that we do is a wet market, you know, from the oceans to climate. There's just so much about how we do business that has always been unsustainable, that has always been, you know, something that the experts have been like, I don't know how long this is going to last. But, you know, there was no epidemiologist that did not think something like this was coming. And somehow we weren't able to do that. And so I guess my question is, does capitalism need a modification here? Is that something that's going to happen? Because I do blame, I think you have to blame some of it on the fact that there is a belief that no matter what, you must maximize profit to your shareholders as a first place thing, far and above all else. But every other problem you can think of, somewhere in there, it's because to me, it's all wet market. So do we feel like there might be a shift coming in what is acceptable for capitalism going forward? Or
yeah. Linda, do you want me to go first on this one?
Yeah, you take, I'm just gonna, something I wanted to look up here on that issue, yeah.
Sure. You know, I think so, just like I was saying, Steve, just a realization in my own life at the personal level. I think this is a system level shock to the system. And you're right. I think people have realized that, you know what, we don't want to go back to the way things were, because the way things weren't great. And that was under a capitalist and a liberal democratic system for much of the world. I mean, just look at what's happened when we've stopped crisscrossing the world in planes, or when we shut down road access in our national parks. What do? We get clear skies. We get wildlife coming out and using corridors that they haven't used before. We get this tremendous reclamation of the natural world when we just pause and take a breath. And the amazing thing is, these last 3 months, and I know we're coming out the other side of it, is we've had that chance. It's been forced on us. It's not been voluntary, but we've had that chance to pause, take a breath, let some systems heal, and then notice what's happened. And so I don't think we know exactly what we need to do, the course we need to chart, but I'm pretty certain, to your point about, you know, people not wanting to go back and say a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 work schedule in a downtown office tower. We know we don't want to go back to the way things were. And given that right now our policymakers have decided to get us out of this shutdown, we're going to undertake a once-in-generation investment in the economy. We don't have to go back. And what I'm seeing, and this is tremendously encouraging, is policymakers wanting to link longer-term objectives like climate and energy transition with short-term stimulus. And we all need to work hard to help them make the right decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, good point, Ed. And I meant to say when we started today, my special thanks to Ed for being here, because I just asked him earlier this week to join me. And I just want to let people know that I've only been in the job with at Pembina for about 70 days now. I actually started during the shutdown. I've not been out of my living room. Everything I've been doing is virtual. So I really appreciate Ed joining me. I'm still on a bit of a learning curve that's been made a little more complex because of the pandemic and the shutdown. So my background before joining Pembina, I did a lot of work in corporate sustainability for a long time for different groups, including in the energy sector in Alberta. And really this debate about, it's going to get accelerated, I think, coming out of the pandemic. But the debate about whether capitalism needs to change has been going on since before. I would say, especially the last 2 years or 18 months, Larry Fink from BlackRock writes an annual letter to all the companies in their portfolio that, is urging them to be more purpose-driven. And last year, the U.S. Business Roundtable, which represents some of the biggest companies in North America, put out a paper on what they call stakeholder capitalism that really challenged some of the short-term views around, we've got to make money this quarter. And then someone was telling me, and I was looking it up here, the theme for next year's World Economic Forum in Davos is the Great Reset. So I do think capitalism is on the table here. It was starting before, and now it's going to be kind of supercharged, I think, coming out of this. And, working on environmental, social, and governance issues in a corporate context, the E has always been really big in ESG. But my own view is that coming out of the pandemic and everything that's converged around it, economically and socially and in terms of human rights, the S is going to get really big here. Social is going to become a much bigger factor for corporations. Yes, it's climate change, but equally it's social inequality and access to the economy. So I think we're in for a lot of change here. Now, the challenge will be, is it all talk at Davos and in seminars or webinars, or is it really going to translate into meaningful change? That's not clear, but are people going to be looking at this more closely, no matter what kind of organization you work for? I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, and I'd love, Steve, can I jump in on that? Because
you can jump in whenever you like, Ed.
Very good, and you just kick me virtually if I'm talking too much.
I do some digital kung fu when necessary. You bet.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, Linda, you're bang on. I'd love to unpack ESG a bit, but one thing, we've learned a couple things. One is, prior to this, increasingly ESG, the rules, environment, social governance, they weren't being dictated by governments. They're actually being dictated by financial centers. And this is one of the reasons why people have realized, holy moly, our energy system really is transitioning, because the Larry Finks of the world and the BlackRock Capital and financial centers in, say, London and New York have been demanding it. And that has placed incredible burden on companies. Infinite cost of capital, being forced to work just on your operating capital. The rules have tightened. And if anything, I think that's just going to, even in spite of the stimulus that's being rolled out, the liquidity measures, that's going to continue. I'd say the other thing, just because we're talking about capitalism, with Black Lives Matter especially, and this is why it's been a tremendous blessing, even though we're dealing with multiple crises, is people seem to be realizing that, I believe capitalism, we need it. It's a bad system, but it's better than everything else, if I'm butchering the phrase. Capitalism with hyper inequality doesn't work. And that's what we've had. hyper inequality with this tremendous spread now between the ultra rich and the rest of us. And that's actually, we shouldn't be relying on the philanthropy of the top 1% of the richest in the world in order to solve our environmental problems. And now I think, we've had this tremendous bucket of water in the face around this hyper inequality, and people are realizing that factors into a bunch of things, including how we protect our environment and what we do on energy and climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just watching the chat here, and let's put a finer point on it. Yes, it's because those financial institutions, and investors are creating pressures, but also insurance companies, banks, lenders. But why are they putting the pressure on companies to be more purpose-driven or accountable or transparent or whatever the criteria you want to put on about changing capitalism, evolving it? They're doing it because their customers want it, because people want it, right? So it's not, as good as the banks might be, it's not that, they're the final arbitrator here, or as efficient as they might be. They're doing it because their customers care about it, right? And it comes down to individuals and where people want their own RRSPs to go, as well as where the big pension funds like the Ontario Teachers or whatever, it's them, but it's also our own, how we at that retail and individual level. So yeah. I think it's both. It's top, there's a top, there's the middle, and then there's the grassroots. But ultimately, I think it's being driven by the grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had been making the analogy for some time. It's a very natural analogy that the Alberta's oil only focused economy has been for many years a roller coaster. It goes up and down, and we're all familiar with it. But since 2014, 2015, it's like that roller coaster has shifted in a downward direction. Given America's fracking revolution, and then just global structural shots to that system, that there's then it goes to tech doesn't want to build here for climate purposes, ostensibly. And then right before the coronavirus is when you got all those big money institutions, international institutions, backing away from oil and gas. And then the coronavirus hits. Then we see negative oil for the first time ever. And so I guess Pembina has walked a delicate line between climate advocacy groups and oil and gas companies, and trying to provide valuable data and policy for people to make this shift for some time. What changes do you think? Do you think Alberta's oil and gas only focus is shifting right now in people's hearts and minds, maybe?
Yeah. So I'll weigh in. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the results of the Fair Deal panel, and some of you, if you've got CBC listeners who are tuning in, you heard Donna Kennedy-Glanz speak very clearly and eloquently about it today. That's what they heard. We're talking about a fair deal, and yet people said over and over, what we need is to diversify our economy. That's hard. And let's be clear that successive governments have failed miserably. They've talked a good talk, but they failed miserably. And if you look, I mean, I remember when I was running Pembina, back in 2011, there was a great panel led by David Emerson, former conservative cabinet minister. He was elected as a Liberal in 2006, crossed the floor to the Harper government, became a cabinet minister, served admirably, left, and he was tapped on the shoulder by then Ed Stelmach, the premier, to lead up a blue ribbon panel to look at diversification options. They came up with tremendous recommendations. You know what? It landed with a thud because of politics at the time, and implementing those recommendations are really hard. And the same thing with the Notley government. And, got a lot of sympathy in the plight that they faced, but they just didn't move forward in any meaningful way. And to date, I'd say the Kenney government hasn't moved forward in any meaningful way. So the one thing I think with the silver lining, listen, the province is flat on its back economically. They're hoping that drones full of bags of cash will come from Ottawa and drop them on the province. But we've got to be clear. We don't want to go back to the way things were, that if it's a once in a generation injection in this economy, we need to do it in a way that leaves Alberta stronger in our energy sector, stronger coming out of this. And I fundamentally believe that is a more diverse energy sector and overall a more diverse economy for Alberta.
Mm-hmm. Linda?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's probably fierce agreement on that, Steve and Ed. I mean, I think everybody sees it. I mean, the challenge is how to do it. And I didn't hear the panel results. Now, I'm not living in Calgary anymore. I'm in Vancouver. I did see it come across the email, but I haven't opened it up. So what was what was the key recommendations from it? From the Donna's panel, Donna Kennedy Glan's panel.
Is this, Steve, when you get to do your news radio, your talk radio filler?
I can. Sorry, go ahead, Ed.
Well, some of the things you'd expect, like a provincial police force, provincial pension plan, a referendum on contributions under the equalization formula. But what was surprising to me, and Donna, when she was on the radio today, said she was surprised as well, is the degree to which diversification, economic diversification came forward, which actually has nothing to do with the deal that Alberta has with Canada, but is just a top of mind concern. And I don't think, at least in my 20 plus years living in this province, that it's ever registered that clearly through a panel that had a very different terms of reference when it went out and listened to Albertans.
Right. Yeah.
Simply, the potential is there for, it's all in the how, but, Alberta is very well positioned in Canada to really be a leader in driving, given the expertise and the infrastructure that exists in Alberta, right, in driving the low carbon innovation and diversification agenda. So, the impact of oil and gas and the collapse in demand and the oversupply has hit Alberta the most. But on the other hand, the opportunities moving forward, Alberta is probably the best position in Canada to take that leadership role because of the existing infrastructure, expertise, capital. I mean, the challenge will be attracting the investment to make it happen, because Ottawa can't do it alone. There's not enough public money. We've got to get some private investors involved here too, obviously. And that loops back to your earlier conversation we just had about ESG and where people want to put their money, and do people want to invest in carbon solutions? And I'll bet you a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
For a few years now, there have been a lot of investors here in this province that have been sitting on their wallets, because it used to be a no-brainer. You just find a way to invest in the tar sands, and they've been. I'm not so sure about that, and so there is money still around that can be placed for this and should be placed for this. I guess. You've kind of introduced my next question, which I love when that happens. That means there's a good flow to the conversation. But when I talk with a few folks in this province, and we talk about, the idea of a Green New Deal for Alberta, I use the term Alberta New Deal, because if you can even just portion off the word green and throw that over your shoulder, almost everybody in Alberta feels like they need a new deal anyways. So I feel like maybe I'm tricking people, but for an Alberta New Deal, what sorts of things stick out to you? Like, this is a no-brainer. If Alberta wanted to take advantage of the transition to low carbon, these are the things they should do, and it could be something that creates jobs and prosperity, etc.
Yeah. I think there are a few things, but first off, we have to recognize the short-term difficulty that we face, because transitions, when you make them, you want to make them from a position of strength. You want to make them from a position of a healthy balance sheet. And that's the opposite of what we have in the province right now. And the analogy I use is, you're not going to install the rooftop solar system on your house when you can't make your mortgage payments. And that's the trouble, is we're having a difficult time meeting our mortgage payments. And if you look, you've got, 20 billion some odd of capital flight out of the sector on an annual basis. and then we're not able to bring in money from overseas. Look at the gargantuan Norwegian sovereign wealth fund that recently said, hey, we're not going to invest in oil sands companies. But to your question, Steve, if I were energy czar for the country, I would first breathe, as I was saying earlier, take a moment to just think, because we're going to be making decisions on huge amounts of money, and we're going to continue to do that over the next few weeks to months. And we sure don't want to squander this opportunity. So let's really think carefully before we start shoveling that money out the door. But then we've got lots of opportunities. We could talk about hydrogen. We could talk about carbon capture and storage. We can talk about methane reduction and increasing the investment that the feds have already made. And the wonderful thing is these happy meeting ground projects where you can cut through the hyperpolarization. Because pre-COVID, let's remember, there's nothing that the government of Alberta and the government of Canada were agreeing upon. Now they're agreeing upon a whole bunch of things because they have to, because we've flattened the conversation. And there's just such desperation to find things they can agree upon. So you've got a short list like that. And I think it's all about mapping out net zero pathways for industrial emissions and including in the energy sector as well.
Yeah, I agree. A real opportunity there for Alberta in the net zero and industrial decarbonization, which is really recognized globally, right? If you read the IEA reports and scenarios, as a big gap right now, right? That needs to attract more investment and innovation. But just on that subject of what the opportunities are in Alberta and the diversification, Pembina just put out a new report this week that's entitled Alberta's Emerging Economy, a Blueprint for Job Creation through to 2030. And this report doesn't look at hydrogen or CC or carbon capture. Those are kind of newer, than the numbers aren't out there, but it does look at renewable electricity, transit and electric vehicle infrastructure, energy efficiency in buildings and industry, and environmental cleanup and methane reduction. And the estimate is for 67,000 jobs available there between now and 2030, with the right types of investment, partnership, and growing these sectors that are already here in Alberta to begin with. So anyhow, for your listeners, go to the Pembina website. It's at the top of the webpage there, and you can download it and take a look.
Yeah.
Linda, we're ahead of you. We've already put the link into the chat, so everybody
good. Thank you very much.
can access and read that right away. And I'll tell you, I looked at your green recovery document there as well. I think that it's you guys continue to do great work. So
yeah, there's a great team at Pembina. They had that green stimulus report done the first day I started, and this one just came out this week. So.
Mm-hmm. So for the city of Calgary, I mean, I feel like with my mayor, I always think about political leaders as people I can work with. Can I work with this person or not? And so my mayor and my city council, I feel like I can get work done with on a climate front. And federally, I feel like with our prime minister, my sense is he wants to transition too. So I feel like I can get work done with him. Provincially, I feel ideological opposition to what I want done. It's oil and gas or nothing. That's just my opinion on it. How can Calgary negotiate this, assuming that I'm correct and our city council also wants to transition, which I think they do? How can we negotiate this thing when in the middle of the chain we do have obstruction there? I mean, energy efficiency. They just took the axe to energy efficiency when that was making $4 for every $1 spent, right? Yeah.
So it's challenging, and certainly the provincial government now has a different worldview than, say, the federal government or the city of Calgary. And just look at the brakes that Minister McIver put on the Green Line, just yesterday. Well, you got the vote was 14-1, and let's go ahead and do it. A $5.5 billion. Forgive me if I got the numbers wrong, but plus $5 billion investments. And Minister McIver said, hey, this has changed and it's not what we looked at. Let's put the brakes. Let's slow down. He's not said no. And to be very clear, he supported transit as minister and as a councillor as well. I think if you're Calgary, you need to look at what has momentum provincially. And instead of trying to say paddle upstream, you paddle downstream. So we'd mention hydrogen as one. There's a tremendous opportunity for the hydrogen economy that taps into diversification. It taps into driving down greenhouse gases and fossil fuels. And you can use it for power, you can use it for fleets, you can use it for trucking, you can use it for the train that was announced from the Calgary airport to Banff. One of the leading considerations of having hydrogen fuel cell engines running that train. And where can you get it? You can get it from the industrial heartland northeast of Edmonton, from natural gas processing, from petrochemicals, anything using steam methane reform. And through a pipeline, you can pipe that down and actually have offtake, have that hydrogen used in the city of Calgary to try to drive down the intensity of fossil fuels, the carbon intensity, that are consumed locally. So something like that, I think, has a tremendous amount of momentum. There's a task force that was recently announced involving 5 mayors. It makes sense economically, environmentally, the feds are interested. So forgive me for being long-winded, but I think if you're Calgary, you have to look at those ones that have momentum, that suit your interests, and jump into that discussion. Anything that isn't a stated objective right now, the provincial government obviously is not going to go very far in the discussion with the provincial government, and especially given some of the political differences.
Yeah, I was going to use that example too, Steve, that Industrial Heartlands project around hydrogen, carbon capture, natural gas decarbonization. It's a very exciting project, and there's a number of communities in Alberta that are involved. There's a real opportunity to form a big coalition here or create a big tent, right, that could include also investors besides government. Right. So that's very exciting. And there would be some opportunities, I'm sure, for Calgary in that. And then all of the technology spin-offs that will come with that. Right. And the real opportunity for Canada and Alberta to be leaders globally in this area. And other countries are gearing up, the UK, Germany, Australia. You read about it in the business pages all the time. But there's a real opportunity for Alberta to jump ahead here with a big demonstration project and some new models. So.
Yeah, and that's serious to jump in, Steve, but that's more happy meeting ground. And it might be that Calgary and the province as a whole recognize, hey, in some specific areas, there are leadership opportunities for Calgary and for the province. We've got tremendous work in renewables. We have the Travis Solar Project, which will be done on a subsidy-free basis, a 400 megawatt project southeast of Calgary and Vulcan County. And it might be that they say, hey, we know we need to transition, and we can work together to provide the world with far cleaner oil and gas exports and capture the revenue from that and be the greenest province in the country and the greenest city in the country as well. And frankly, that's the Norway recipe. Everyone holds up Norway as this paragon of environmentalism. Frankly, what they've done is we're going to provide the world with cleaner oil and gas. We're going to capture that revenue. We're going to try to be the cleanest country in the world. I think there's something we can learn from that.
Yeah. Okay. I saw that you guys mentioned building retrofits, energy retrofits, et cetera, in your green stimulus thing. And I keep hearing that seems to be something that a lot of people are talking about as a good starting point. And I think, giving construction jobs out there and building a coalition around businesses that are in construction, et cetera, to back these things up might be a way to help get this stuff through. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about that opportunity.
Yeah, well, this is an area that Pembina is pretty active in, and buildings and homes represent up to 13% of Canada's GHG emissions right now, and at least half of the current building stock in Canada, could probably be economically retrofitted to improve efficiency, as well as build up local supply chains and workforce opportunities. So our view is that the opportunities in this sector are enormous in terms of not only making homes and workplaces healthier, but also making, accessing more renewable and carbon smart material. So, but there's a code here that has to be cracked because a lot of these projects are smaller in scale. So how do you put together the money to invest in them, whether it's government money or private? But certainly the Canadian Infrastructure Bank could play a role, in our view, in co-financing retrofits. And then we need some kind of aggregators that'll come in and scale up or bunch up projects and then scale them up and make them easier for people to invest in. But I think you're going to see a lot of governments, including the government of Alberta. I know here in British Columbia, the government here is looking at it as well as part of the rebuilding and the economic stimulus and recovery. So hopefully more to come on that front. But that's another domestic opportunity that can really make a difference, create jobs, and reduce GHG emissions, and make people's homes more efficient and better in bad weather or even good weather or hot weather. And there's a health benefit there too. So I think moving forward, these types of opportunities are going to need to be framed more as multiple benefit things. It's, yes, we'll get GHG reductions, but there'll be a health benefit. There'll be a local supply chain benefit. There'll be a jobs benefit. And I think those of us in the environmental sector have to get better at making those kinds of arguments and linking these kinds of benefits, because as important as GHGs are, they're not the only reason for doing this, and particularly coming out of the pandemic and all the other, crises that we're involved in right now. So.
Yeah. I think, Linda, you said it all. I have very little to add. Save energy efficiency building retrofits. Unfortunately, it's not the sexiest of topics. It's hard to win an election campaign on that, but it's so important, and often it's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of a cost per ton basis. So stay tuned. The feds have a lot in the works. We'll get those incentives, and Linda, you're absolutely right. It'll be linked to stimulus, and there are opportunities, as you said, with the Infrastructure Bank, which has $35 billion to improve infrastructure in Canada. Well, we've got this tremendous building stock, net zero building ambitions, and Pembina has done some terrific work on it, and cheap tons to go after. So it completely makes sense. I think a big opportunity, frankly, is residential building labeling of energy efficiency. It's something that Pembina's worked on. And what we need if we're buying and selling buildings is you need a clear label, just like a health guide on a food product or your Nike shoes showing you what's in there. We need good labeling to show the energy performance of that building. And to do that, frankly, we need the real estate industry to stop being the blockage on it. I'm sure my inbox is going to fill up with people in the real estate industry mad at me saying they're not the blockage.
But I think it's happening in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay, well, there you scared me for a second with that. Yeah, not that I'm not used to some public criticism, but yeah, I think there's some simple things that we can do. We frankly need the public constantly calling for it. And what we don't want to do is what we've just recently done. We don't want to kill Energy Efficiency Alberta. That is a step backwards.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a pet peeve about the climate advocate world. A lot of us tend to silo up, and we double up our work sometimes. And so right now I hear phrases like a green recovery, a green stimulus, or Green New Deal. All of it sounds like the Sustainable Development Goals to me. Really, I could make that case. There's a group that's called Just Recovery for All. I'm interviewing them down the road, and they've got 250 organizations signed on, which is great. And then there's another group that has X amount of businesses signed on to a green stimulus, and another group. I guess what I want to figure out is how can we all come together around the same thing here, instead of getting parceled away here? Is it even possible?
It's a good question, Steve, and it gets to, are we going to come out of this hyper-partisan, hyper-politicized environment that we've been in? And I think one of the silver linings of COVID, and I mentioned it earlier, is that we've seen this tremendous flattening of conversations. Like the federal government is talking to provinces unlike in sort of quantity and quality, unlike anything that we've seen before. And you've seen, for the most part, take Alberta and Canada, the trickiest relationship of the Confederation. They've kind of laid down weapons and they said, we've got a mutual enemy in COVID. You know, we've got the Martians and we might not like each other normally, but we have to fight off the Martians. So let's lay down our weapons and figure out how to do this together. So that's been a silver lining, and I hope we continue it. Mm-hmm. I put that, and just we talked about it before we actually went live. I've been part of a podcast. We put that, we had 300 people on our first podcast. We put it as a question. Do you think it's going to get better? This hyperpolarization, is it going to get worse? It looked like a Canadian federal election result. And that went 38% people saying it's going to get better. And well, 32% say it's going to get worse. And then the remainder sit on the fence, you know? Right. So the question is, we don't know, but until we do that, we're going to be spending so much time fighting ourselves or fighting amongst ourselves instead of doing what we need to do, which is having all parts of the economy, public, private, NGO sectors working at full scale, full capacity on this problem. Because if we don't do that, frankly, we're not going to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Steve, you know, my own view would be, yeah, there's a lot of groups out there, and we at Pembina have signed on to a lot of letters lately, some of them the groups you just mentioned, you know, so we're part of various coalitions or groups that are pushing on this. But I think that diversity is okay, as long as, you know, there's a fairly consistent direction that comes out of it, right? And, you know, I think what a lot of groups, at least the ones that we're involved with at Pembina, what they've said is, first of all, there's the relief and rescue part of this, right? And that's the most important part. And, you know, the big policies that the federal government brought in there for CERB and the wage relief and the wage subsidy, and, you know, that's the most important thing. And I think, you know, everybody agreed that's the most important thing. And it's had to last longer than everybody thought. I thought, you know, at first we thought it was going to be a V, remember? It would be a steep down and then we would bounce back up, and it's going longer. So that sort of rescue and relief part is going to cost more money. But then the rebuilding and the stimulus and the recovery opportunities are there. And I think you're hearing a lot of groups say the same thing about that second phase when we get to it. And we're not there yet, but when we get to it, I think you're seeing quite a bit of convergence from very diverse groups. And, you know, there's this, Ed, what's it called? The Resilient Recovery Task Force that's, you know, doing a lot of research and putting together, taking all of these different submissions and trying to put them into a framework. So I think some convergence here is happening. Maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity for convergence or a once in a generation, but I don't get the impression a lot of people disagree that these are areas that buildings, transportation, industrial decarbonization, you know, there's some fierce agreement that these are good things to do. They'll create jobs, they'll create other benefits.
Yeah,
and it's not quite there yet, right?
If you'll permit me, a public service announcement for the movement. So there is tremendous convergence, and I think it behooves us as a movement as much as possible right now to build big tent coalitions.
Yeah.
The reason being is because my job, like Linda, I end up talking to policymakers a lot. So I'm channeling my inner Mandarin. And the direction is, rather than having 100 conversations, we can only see an inch in front of our toes right now. And that's a direct quote from a guy in Freeland's office I was talking to. We see an inch in front of our toes because it's still thick and fast. So the more you can build a Big Ten coalition and go in and say, we're asking for the same thing, and I brought 80 of my friends to the party, they're like, oh man, that's great. And even better if the 80 friends represent different spectrums, different sides of the political spectrum. So it's a great opportunity. We got to work hard to build those coalitions. And I guarantee if you do that, you're going to be listened more and you're going to get that meeting than just trying to go in by yourself right now.
Yeah.
You know, I'll let it
the big tent, you know, that's really important. And it's an opportunity to, as you guys have both said, break down the polarization that has really prevented the people from acting on some of the solutions here, right? So.
Yeah, and I'll editorialize for a second and talk about the movement. I feel like, Black Lives Matter is successful because everybody knows that phrase and knows what it means. I mean, just people who play around with it and that are bad actors, but everybody that's on the side of the just, has no problem accessing that terminology. And similarly, the Me Too movement. Me Too happened, and all of a sudden, everybody knew what it meant, and everybody that's a positive actor was able to grab onto that terminology. And I still feel like as a movement, we don't have that hashtag yet, that movement piece yet. And I'm waiting for it, and I'm looking for it. I'm thinking about it.
Well, that's because some of the issues we work on they're complex, right? There is no simple solution. These things are all related. And the policy solutions and the business and the technology, the community solutions are complex, and they do require people to come together and collaborate on them, right? And so as Ed has said, if you're in a time of polarization, or if there's a lot of polarization going on, it's hard to make progress, but maybe there's an opportunity to push past that now.
Yeah. And one thing I experienced, Steve, when, years ago, and gosh, it was 2012, and it was like January 2nd or January 3rd, 2012. Then I think he was still Natural Resources Minister, Joe Oliver, published a letter in the Financial Post basically declaring war on the climate and energy movement in Canada. And that's the first time brought up the trope. Foreign funded activists, and they're taking money to shut down jobs.
Right.
All the things that we've been, frankly, countering ever since, because it's a load of malarkey. But then that began a series of attacks coming out of the Harper government, and fairly well orchestrated, to delegitimize the climate and energy movement publicly and attack their legitimate sources of funding through things like CRA audits. But what that happened, the effect was, and I like to tell this story for people in the movement, is it forced us at the time, those who are part of the climate and energy movement, to think and act like a movement. It's like the Martians analogy. Oh, we've got the Martians attacking, so why are we arguing amongst ourselves? We've got this common front we need to fight. And as a result, it really thought and acted like a movement, so that when things changed, and things changed in early 2015 with a change of government in Edmonton, and then in the fall of 2015 with a change of government in Ottawa, and they came in and said, hey, we're open for business. Tell us, what are your great ideas? What can we do in climate and energy? You'd already had this tremendous coordination and cohesion. So a policy window flew open, and man, did the movement get a lot through those windows, provincially and federally, before they closed again. And had they not had that boot stamping on their faces for several years together, and had they not had that unification, then I don't think it would have happened, and the movement wouldn't have worked and moved as quickly as it did.
So the final question I have for you before we go to our panelists, for climate activists like myself, for climate organizations like the Calgary Climate Hub, what can we do right now to take advantage of the moment and push for the just recovery, so that moving forward, whatever money gets spent on the right things?
Well, we've talked about a couple of these areas already, right? So housing and building retrofits, transportation.
But specifically what I'm asking is how can the hub help make this stuff happen, I guess is what I'm trying to.
Yeah. I think people go to the Pembina site. I'm going to give a shout out to my old outfit and shout out to Linda. Frankly, go to the Pembina site, look at the document for principles for green stimulus and recovery, and start talking to your MP, start talking to your councillor. Hell, chuck some money Pembina's way. Try to get involved in the Pembina event. There's a tremendous amount of momentum, and you need an organization like Pembina right now to be, basically loaded up to have a strong voice. And ultimately, when it publishes something in the newspaper, you need a bunch of people writing letters to the editor saying, we agree, let's keep on going. So at an individual level, I think that's, for me, and I'm not pandering to my other guests here.
Well, I appreciate it, even if you are. So that's good.
At the risk, because she invited me on this webinar tonight, I think that's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Well, and I just echo that. Just get involved. Let your local council members, your local government, your provincial government know that when it's time to start rebuilding here, when we come to that point, these are the kind of projects that will create. These are the kind of activities and investments that will create those multiple benefits that we're all really looking for. Socially, as economically, and environmentally. Coming out of the pandemic. So I think it is a message of personal involvement, writing letters, sending emails, going to meetings, occasionally, showing up at marches, all of the above. But you're right, Ed, it's also being informed, right? But I think the Calgary Climate Hub, from what I've seen in the chat, you guys are a pretty well-informed group.
Well, we're sharp. We're sharp. I'll tell
You're
you.
sharp. You're definitely on this. Yeah.
Yeah. These are great questions, and I had to stop myself, Steve, from sort of cherry picking some of them as we're going through.
Well, it's tough because there's the questions that I need to ask, and then I see these ones come through. And well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get to my panelists in a second, but before we do, I'll just mention our sponsor. Skyfire Energy has been designing and installing solar PV systems for homeowners, business owners, utilities, municipalities, and First Nations since 2001. They're an employee-owned certified B Corporation with offices in Calgary, Edmonton, Penticton, and Regina. Their staff is one of the most experienced and qualified teams in the industry, having completed many of the largest and most complex solar projects in Western Canada. Their vision is to bring the magic of solar power to the world for a stronger, healthier, and more sustainable global community. I'll also take this moment to let our viewers know they can check out some of the Pembina Institute's latest works regarding a green stimulus, principles for recommendations for a 2020 economic stimulus package, and a lot of other great policy work, which can be downloaded now at their website at pembina.org. So go and check them out. We've got connections to all of their website and social network connections are in the chat. Feel free to check them out and join and follow and like, etc. I'm sure they'll like and follow you back. One of the final things before we go to our panelists, I'll just remind our viewers that this is Aboriginal Awareness Week, and I invite you to attend an online event put on at the University of Calgary tomorrow afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. focused on Indigenous resilience and a discussion about how to use Indigenous ways of knowing to move forward together with strength and hope. You can register for this event now at the Calgary Climate Hub website, the link for which is in this chat. Okay, this is our Q&A session. We allow our questioners both a question and a follow-up. We'll also continue to take your questions via the Zoom chat and our Facebook Live feed. So post those up and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I think our first one is a new Calgary Climate Hub member as of a couple of weeks ago, Robert Tremblay. That's if I've got the order right. And it looks like he's coming up.
Hey.
Hi, Rob.
Hey.
You're live. What do you got?
Okay. I've read the green stimulus document, and I haven't read the which was it, the Alberta's emerging economy, but I'll definitely take a peek. But I think in Calgary we're kind of in an interesting situation. We're looking kind of negatively at it. We don't have a super cooperative, I think, provincial government, but I think kind of like Bentley mentioned, we have like a city council that I think cares, and we have a federal government that I think cares. So I think looking at the green stimulus, or even listening to you guys talk tonight, like stuff like seating, home heating with hydrogen, et cetera. I think there's lots of good ideas that are actionable, but I think I guess the short version of this question I have is, for us in Calgary, what's actionable, and then who should we talk to about getting it done if some levels of government have kind of resistance?
So, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. What is actionable? We'd ended with some of the things that you can do, and I gave a shout out to Pembina. coincidentally, give a shout out to Skyfire as well. I think it's a terrific company, and they did 2 4-kilowatt systems for my roof. So that's always actionable. It's just action at the individual level, whether it's supporting an environmental group or yourself putting a rooftop solar system on your roofs. I think, and at the risk of repeating myself, what's actionable is looking at demanding, just like people with the Fair Deal panel said, demanding we have a serious conversation on economic diversification, and then B, demanding at all levels that serious conversation involve leaving at the end an Alberta that is more competitive, that is lower emissions, and is leaner and meaner coming out of it. And I think if we don't continue to beat that drum, and if we don't continue to voice dissatisfaction with the status quo, we actually do run the risk of going back to the way things were. And, let's look at it. Like already the price of Western Canada Select has come back up. It was what, $34 thereabouts after us having to pay people for offtake. The track record of this province is poor. And that is, we get really nervous and we talk a good talk when the price goes down. When the price goes back up, then everyone relaxes. And we're like, okay, well, we don't have a problem anymore. We have to admit we have a problem. We're too dependent on a barrel of oil that is high priced, high carbon, and that regardless of where you live in Alberta, we need to come up with a plan to ensure that we're competitive, not just next year, but we're competitive 10, 15 years out. Don't know what the plan is, but I just know we need to have that conversation right now. And whether it's a Royal Commission or a panel or something like that, we need it pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, I'd just add to that by saying that I think diversification is actionable. And if you look at that new report on jobs that Pembina just put out, you'll see a number of areas there that are not complex, that don't require huge investments. So that is actionable. But you got to get governments and private investors and businesses and communities all rowing in the same direction around those opportunities. And I know that in Calgary, you've got a pretty active Calgary Economic Development Group there. Go to their website as well and look at what kind of events that they're convening. And get behind the diversification movement, like make it a movement, and put environment and social equality and some of those basic values at the center of that movement, I guess is what Ed and I are saying, along with many others now in Canada.
Yeah. It used to be, Rob, that would say in Alberta, oh God, please give us another boom, and I promise I won't piss it away this time. It's like, I promise not to piss away this crisis. We don't need another crisis as long as we don't piss away this one. So I don't know if that's helpful. I always feel these questions, what can we do at the individual level? Difficult to answer, but let's not piss away this crisis.
Yeah.
Really,
yeah. And I guess when I kind of look back on situations in my lifetime where I've been involved with, where there's been a lot of conflict and opinions, people can't get along. If you can find the one point that you can agree upon and forget or just put to the side all of the other points that you can't. But if you can find that one point and coalesce around it and kind of float downstream with it, a lot of those other factors will start to change. And if it's diversification right now for Alberta, if that's the point of convergence where people from all sides on different issues can come together, then use it, right? And drive it towards the social and the environmental goals that the hub wants to see achieved.
Absolutely.
Rob, did that answer your question?
I think pretty well. I think can I follow up just like a little bit?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. Like I think so. For example, like I'll tweet about this stuff, or like I'll talk to my friends and family, or like even like the office. I'll mention all that stuff kind of personally to, I guess, like acquaintances or whoever. But like I guess like, should I be emailing like councillors, MLAs, or MPs about it, or like is there other things, I guess, as well, like that Bentley said, like I'm a new member of the hub, so I'm hoping kind of maybe this can lead to kind of a bigger voice for the movement as well, but I'm not sure if that's super coherent. But I guess just who should I be engaging about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've named the ones. Like I don't know what's changed, but often I talk to MPs or, I remember David Swan talking to him when he was both an MLA and leader of the Alberta Liberal Party. And it's like, I don't hear enough about the climate issue, So we've got to maybe it's getting back into the habit of not just posting on social media, but let's our elected officials like reach out to them directly. And honestly, I mean, for me, the magic number on an issue is 100 letters. You get 100 letters in on an issue to a minister's office, then they're going to start to pay attention, or an MP's office. So, you're going to do it. You write that email, get 99 of your friends to do the same thing, and at least you're going to get a response on it. At least it's registered. So I can't overestimate the importance of that old-fashioned sort of grassroots activist tactic, just reaching out to your elected official. So you're bang on.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Rob. And we're glad to have you on board at the Hub.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You bet. Okay, so our next panelist is another Climate Hub member in good standing, and I would say a fellow staunch advocate for an Alberta New Deal. His name is Jim McPhail. It looks like he's coming up here right now. Hi, Jim.
Hi, folks. How are you doing? Linda, I've really been enjoying this. There's been a ton of stuff coming out today that you're speaking to my heart and to my head. I did want to come in at a slightly different slant, although as you've gone along, you've already taken a number in terms of, say, Linda talking about policies. You both mentioned Norway and Sweden. Partly why I want to go with this is instead of, I guess, doing this, bashing people over the head and so on, it struck me that actually we could play by the rules of the game related to, if you want, capitalism and big business and the 0.01%. And I think, as you've mentioned already with Norway and Sweden, take California, where in fact, rather than having to fight to actually defend a tax, because that's so easy to put up as the big mean boogeyman, that policies, regulations, and so on have served really well in other jurisdictions. Say around, how much carbon is there in the fuels that we're using, the mileage on vehicles, the decarbonation, as you mentioned, say for our electricity use of more of it, that I think actually we could see governments actually putting more out there in terms of, here are the standards, here are the regulations, here's what you have to meet, business, to be able to operate here. And it's not going to be a cash grab. We might put some money into supporting if research is needed, but frankly, if the signal is you're going to make money if you meet the standards that we're putting out, then they jump on it. They can make it happen. Heck, we've got Trump right now actually dropping back from what vehicles done forever. I mean, this talk about, hit 55 and stuff. I had a rabbit back in the early 70s that was getting 55 miles a gallon. And since then we've talked about, we might ever get there. It's like, we were there, folks. So I guess what I'm looking at is, I think there are other ways to play this game. And it comes, I think, at some of what you're talking about is, we still have to get to the right politicians. We have to get the points across. I think we happen to have maybe a unique province here that we're in, that 100 letters may not mean a thing, but that's unique. I think we still do. So I could see us, as you've already mentioned, we could be hitting construction. Actually, there's cement, for instance, that actually is a carbon sink. If we start to actually mandate the use of that, maybe we can do that at the city level. I think that's more provincial jurisdiction there. But if we put in funding, then maybe we say, okay, well, we'll do it on such and such a basis. But I want to get your thoughts on that in terms of our actually looking at standards and regulations behind the scenes, so that we're not actually fighting these big win-lose battles with big business, but in fact saying, okay, here are the rules, here's where we're going. And it's not so easy then for big business then to throw it up as the horrible, mean, ugly villain. Also, you could be doing it by different industries. So you hive them off rather than the 0.01%, it's like, okay, here's what we need out of agriculture, especially corporate agriculture. Here's what we need out of transportation. So
Yeah.
I want to toss to you, what do you think on
Yeah,
that?
no, I think you're right, Jim. And, Ed and I have been talking a lot tonight about stimulus, right?
Yep.
And rebuilding and how governments can direct money and then can private investment, either big investors or small investors, jump on top of that to accelerate change. But you're absolutely right. The regulation and policy environment is fundamental, and we haven't talked about that tonight. And it's very important on carbon pricing, right? The federal backstop price, the clean fuel standard is trying to weave its way to be gazetted and start to be enforced in Canada. These are things that those of us involved with the Calgary Climate Hub and other groups in this sector need to really keep an eye on, because if you lost those fundamental regulatory framework requirements there and the new Canadian Impact Assessment Agency, right, on the environmental side, we've got a lot of policies that are part of the Canada's Pan-Canadian Climate Framework that you need to keep your eye on too. So it's not just the stimulus, it's that framework, that backbone is equally important. And we can't afford to lose that at this point in time, even though there is a focus on the investment and moving forward here.
Yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, Jim, great question. There's a lot there to unpack. First of all, on big business, I find in environmental issues, often big business goes through a few stages. One, they deny there's a problem. Two, they deny there's anything they can do about the problem. Three, they deny there's a technology to solve the problem. Four, they deny it's economically feasible. But then they actually do something about the problem once you work through those stages. And then once they accept it, and because it's part of capital, right? You're trying to kick off maximum value for your shareholders, and often you have to make investments that erodes that value. But then once you move through those stages, and once governments are very clear on what the rules are, and industry wants that, then industry can move incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
So that's what we need, but we need a carrots and sticks approach. So you need the sticks. And the problem right now in this country is we're not going to have resilient sticks that we need until, frankly, the right, and I can't remember when you said the right, talking to the right people, if you meant right in the political sense or just right in the correct sense, but until the right comes around to agreeing on climate change, because it's a huge impediment. If you're going in and if you think that a policy like carbon pricing is going to be undone by the next government that comes into power, whether it be the US, Canada, Australia, then your willingness to invest the massive amount of capital in to comply with that regulation, that stick, goes way down. So we really need to make it a bipartisan issue, the way that climate is in BC and in Quebec, and at least carbon pricing. But then on the carrots, we need to look at what's working and how they work in harmony. And if you look at carbon capture as one example, in the US, they've got a good stick and carrot recipe with a low carbon fuel standard, and Linda mentioned the Canadian equivalent, in California as the stick, but then carrots, credits that you can sell into the market through that system. Also carrots like the Department of Energy willing to provide low cost loans for technology still with technology risk, or a tax credit for carbon capture, which is really working to spur carbon capture projects in the US in a way that isn't happening right now in Canada. You get that blend right, and things can happen really, really quickly. And we're still searching for that here.
That take care of your question there, Jim?
Just one follow-up, and it's following what you're suggesting, Ed, is that I think one part of what I really appreciate there was that, in fact, it's not all one great big huge honking thing, that it's a die on this hill. A number of different initiatives, ventures, regulations, policies, so on, can definitely work together. In fact, this might seem heresy nowadays for some of us, but carbon tax, cap and trade isn't necessarily what's going to fix things for us. And
Absolutely.
we can, with the other policies in place, regulation, we can reach goals without those if we follow through on those well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the speakers you've had on here is Mark Jacquard from SFU, right? And I think that, you know, Mark has talked a lot about the regulatory framework, and, you know, and it's done a number of papers. You can go look on his webpage, and looked at the mix between hard regulation, flexible regulation, and incentives. And
Right.
for sure, it's no one thing. It's not, we know we're past the stage where we think carbon pricing is going to solve the problem, but it's definitely got to be part of the solution, but in combination with a number of other things,
Yeah.
like fuel standard,
Right.
and some of
Thanks
the
very much.
And part of it, just to add to that, and it goes back, and Isabelle Couture had a great question. Hello, Isabelle. It's been a while. About advocacy exhaustion. There's actually regulator exhaustion right now. So I've been working on something that isn't currently a tool in the toolkits of federal policy or regulation on climate. And the first question is, well, man, Ed, we've done everything. We've done clean fuel standard, we've done carbon pricing, you know, we've overhauled the energy regulator. What more can you ask for? Well, it's not enough. We do need more. The recipe isn't complete, but here's an ingredient that's really simple to do. It's not going to cost you. And I brought 99 of my friends in the room as well to say, go ahead and do it. So we have to be very mindful that policymakers have done a lot in the last few years, especially federally, and they need to be convinced as why they should do any more.
Good point. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Jim, thank you very much for the question, and also thank you for the great work you do in this city on climate. You're a solid ally, and I love you, buddy.
Okay, I'll give you $10 later.
It costs more than $10.
No, 2 drinks. Okay, thanks.
Okay, you bet. Thanks. Well, you know, so I was gonna ask you Isabelle Couture's question. Isabelle does some great work for Plastic Free YYC. I'll do a shout out for her anytime. Is there any other questions you saw in the chat that jump out at you? You've got time for one or two if you feel like it.
I do want to just, in response to Isabelle's question, and people can see it here, you know, what's the best way to fight apathy and advocacy exhaustion? Also a shout out to my friend and colleague, a guy named Steph Legault, who's just published a book called Taking a Break from Saving the World. And so if you want a very engaging read on how to prevent advocacy exhaustion, or more likely, what happens when you hit it? We all hit that wall and we never think, oh, I can't afford to take a break. He's written the book literally called Taking a Break from Saving the World. Go to just Google him, Stefan Legault. So I think have a look at it. I think you'll quite like it.
Linda, is a question jump out at you there that you feel a desired answer?
Well, there's the question here about how effective are online petitions, if at all, in making our voices heard and contributing to build a movement. You know, I think they indicate something, right? You know, even if it's only directional. I don't know. I mean, Ed, I think I would subscribe to your theory that if you give an MLA 100 letters, they will notice that. Now, I'm not so sure about 100 emails. What do you think, Ed? 100 emails?
No, the best thing is 100 handwritten letters by kids.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to jump to the top of the priority list, get 100 kids to handwrite letters.
Yeah.
Nothing more powerful.
Yeah, okay, admittedly, there's some problem with digital astroturf these days, there's no doubt. But again, we'll just go back to what we said earlier. If you look at the climate, if you're listening to the climate movement in Canada right now and watching what people are saying and how they're linking climate issues to health issues, to quality of life, to social equality and addressing those inequities, I think you see a movement that is coming together and sending a pretty consistent message to different levels of government that mainstream Canada can probably get behind. So, you know, maybe now is not the time to take a break.
I like that. Okay, well, so that's almost it for this week's Climate of Change, but I'll ask my guests, is there anything that you'd like to communicate to our viewers that you have not yet had the chance to communicate?
it's been a crazy time, but I'd also say, it's time like this, you're alive, when the world changes dramatically. But yeah, let's make the most of this crisis. Let's not squander it. Let's make the most of this once in a generation investment in the economy. And let's hope that 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, it was tough, but thank gosh we experienced it, because we're a much better place as a result.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. We've got a big opportunity at hand here in all parts of Canada, in Calgary and Alberta, but elsewhere too. So let's make the most of it.
Excellent. Well, I'll let the two of you know if you're hip to jumping on Facebook. There's still a bunch of questions on Facebook Live that you could respond to at any point if you felt so inclined. Beyond that, I want to thank the both of you so much for coming on here tonight. I'm so glad we were able to get not just one, but two great big minds from Pembina here. And I'll let you know how important I think the work is that you do. And moving forward through these wildly unprecedented times, I know we're going to need the Pembina Institute more than ever. So thank you once again.
Okay, thank you. We'll be there. Thank you. Bye.
Awesome.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. That was fun.
Bye.
You bet.
Yeah, it was good. Thanks, Ed.
So next week's show, we'll have Brandy Burdenyuk from Green Business Certification Incorporated, GBCI. Brandy's worked with leading designers, businesses, institutions, and governments to excite them about creating, living, working, and thriving in healthy, sustainable buildings. That'll be a good one you don't want to miss, and we've included the RSVP link in the chat. Once again, if you like this Thursday night broadcast, we want you to know it wouldn't be possible without our excellent sponsor, Skyfire Energy. They paved the way for solar in Western Canada, and like the Pembina Institute, will certainly be a big part of our future. I'll mention the Calgary Climate Hub. That's the group that I call home. If you are not a part of a climate organization and climate is something that is important to you, I urge you to seek one out and join one, especially one that moves the ball and makes a difference. It's the only thing that relieves climate anxiety, to my experience, is to sit around the table with smart people that are working on the right things. And I'll just mention we played a role in influencing City Council on the Green Line. It makes me proud to be a part of this organization, and you can feel that too by either becoming a member or donating to the Calgary Climate Hub. So beyond that, I guess I want to thank Shay, Joan, and Paul. And beyond that, I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in and caring about the right things. Good night for now, and let's get to work.